I am Julian, 28 years old. 2 years ago, my own brother stole my wife, and my parents actually paid for the luxury hotel where they carried out their affair. While I was working double shifts to pay our mortgage, my parents told me I was never good enough for her anyway. They laughed at me in front of our entire family during a Thanksgiving dinner, treating my divorce like it was a punchline. But there is one thing they didn't know. I was silently building an empire, acquiring the very real estate and distribution channels my brother desperately needed to survive. And now, my ex-wife is standing in the freezing rain on my porch, begging for my help. Before I tell you exactly how I destroyed their perfect little world, hit that like button if you believe in justice. And don't forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Now, let's go back to where the nightmare and my ultimate revenge began. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late November. The kind of miserable, bone-chilling Tuesday in the Pacific Northwest where the rain does not just fall. It slices sideways, turning the streets into cold, gray rivers and making the world look entirely devoid of color. I was standing in the massive foyer of my custom-built home, a sprawling property shielded by heavy iron gates, ancient pine trees, and a strict HOA that ensured absolute privacy. I had a cup of dark roast coffee in my hand, the steam curling into the cool air of the house, as I reviewed a massive commercial real estate contract on my tablet. My life now is quiet. It is deliberate. It is perfect. Then the security buzzer rang. The sound echoed sharply against the marble floors. I rarely get unannounced visitors. I walked over to the security panel mounted on the wall and tapped the screen to wake it up. The high-definition camera feed flickered slightly through the heavy downpour, but the image was unmistakable. It hit me like a physical blow to the chest, stealing the breath from my lungs for a fraction of a second. Standing right outside my front gate, drenched to the very bone, was Chloe, my ex-wife. Her expensive designer trench coat, a coat I had purchased for her 3rd anniversary, gift by working overtime for 3 months straight, was soaked dark and plastered to her shivering frame. Her hair, which she used to spend hours styling every single morning, hung in wet, pathetic strands across her face. Her makeup was running down her cheeks in dark, muddy streaks. But the real shock, the thing that made my grip tighten on my coffee mug until my knuckles turned white, was not her sudden, tragic appearance. It was the bundle she was clutching desperately to her chest, wrapped in a faded blue blanket to shield it from the wind and rain. A baby. I stared at the screen, my heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. 2 years ago, the mere sight of her shedding a single tear would have ripped my heart out of my chest. 2 years ago, I would have thrown the front doors open, run out into the freezing storm without a jacket, wrapped her in my arms, and moved heaven and earth to fix whatever had broken her. I was a man completely, foolishly, blindly in love. But the man who loved Chloe died a very violent, sudden death the day I caught her in our marital bed, tangled in the sheets with my own flesh and blood. I pressed the intercom button. The metallic click echoed loudly in the large, empty hallway. "What do you want, Chloe?" My voice was entirely flat, completely devoid of any of the warmth, love, or even anger I used to reserve for her. It was the voice of a stranger. She flinched at the sound of my voice coming through the speaker pillar in the rain. "Julian, please." Her voice cracked, a desperate, raspy sound cutting through the static and the sound of the storm. "Caleb left me. He took everything. The bank took the house, the lawyer drained the rest of our accounts for the lawsuit. I do not have a single dollar to my name, Julian. I have not eaten since yesterday. Please, just let me in. It is freezing out here, and the baby is sick." I watched her on the monitor. I watched the woman who had shattered my world, who had conspired with the very people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, just to leave me with absolutely nothing. I thought about the days I spent sleeping on the floor of a rented storage unit, wondering why I wasn't enough. I thought about the absolute humiliation of my divorce, the way she smirked across the mediation table while demanding half of my meager salary. "Call my brother?" I said coldly, my voice steady and unyielding. "It is his mess, not mine. You chose him. Go find him." "He won't answer the phone," she sobbed, holding the baby up slightly, almost offering the child to the camera as if using the infant as a human shield against my indifference. Julian, please, I have nowhere else to go. I tried calling your parents, but they won't take my calls either. They blocked my number. I know I ruined everything. I know I broke your heart. I know I do not deserve an ounce of your forgiveness. But I am begging you, Julian. Look at me. Please, just open the gate. I took a slow sip of my coffee. The rich, dark roast tasted exceptionally good today. The warmth of the mug seeped into my hands, a stark contrast to the freezing misery she was experiencing on the other side of the iron bars. You made your choices, Chloe, I said, leaning closer to the microphone, making sure every single syllable was crystal clear. You wanted the golden boy. You wanted the fast cars, the high society parties, and the easy life. You threw me away like garbage to get it. Now the bill has come due and you have to live with the tab. Step away from my property right now, or I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. I took my finger off the button. I didn't wait to see her reaction. I didn't care if she fell to her knees and screamed my name to the heavens. I simply turned around, walked back into my warm, quiet living room, and sat down on my leather sofa to finish reading my contract. I didn't feel an ounce of guilt. I didn't feel a shred of pity. I felt nothing but a profound, absolute sense of peace. Because to understand why I could leave a weeping woman and a freezing baby in the rain without batting an eye, you have to understand the sheer magnitude of what she, my brother, and my parents did to me. You have to understand what it feels like to be the backup plan of your own family, the designated punching bag, the invisible child who was only kept around to make the golden child look brighter. You have to understand the years of psychological torture I endured before I finally snapped and decided to take everything from them. Growing up in my house, the rules were never explicitly written on the walls, but they were carved into the very foundation of my reality every single day. The dynamic was completely set in stone by the time I was old enough to walk. Rule number 1. Caleb is the priority, the king, the chosen one. Rule number 2. Julian is the afterthought, the burden, the shadow. My parents, Arthur and Helen, were not overtly abusive in the physical sense. They didn't hit me. They didn't lock me in closets or deny me basic meals. Their brand of abuse was much more insidious. It was a slow, steady, daily drip of neglect, comparison, and passive-aggressive cruelty that completely poisoned my self-worth over 2 decades. Caleb is 3 years older than me. From the moment he could form a sentence, he was the star of the show. He was the high school quarterback, the charismatic charmer, the boy who could talk his way out of a speeding ticket, manipulate his teachers into giving him extensions, and charm his way into any girl's heart. He was tall, athletic, and possessed this arrogant, entitled smirk that my parents tragically confused for genuine confidence and leadership. I was completely different. I was quiet, deeply observant, and fascinated by science, specifically chemistry and the complex chemistry of scent. While Caleb was out throwing wild house parties and trashing the family living room, I was locked in my bedroom mixing essential oils, trying to figure out how volatile top notes transitioned into grounding base notes to create a lasting fragrance. I wasn't causing trouble, but in my parents' eyes, I wasn't causing pride either. I was just taking up space. The financial divide was the most glaring, undeniable evidence of my standing in the family hierarchy. Let me give you a perfect example. When Caleb turned 18, my parents threw a massive celebration. They bought him a brand new sports car. I still remember the blinding glare of the sun off the pristine silver paint. They tied a massive, obnoxious red bow to the hood and invited half the neighborhood, all their country club friends, and our entire extended family over for a catered barbecue. They treated his entry into adulthood like the crowning of a prince. When I turned 18, there was no party. There was no car. It was a Tuesday. My mother handed me a $20 gift card to Walmart, patted me on the shoulder, and told me I needed to start looking for a part-time job to pay for my own gas if I expected to drive her 10-year-old minivan to school. I remember standing in the kitchen, holding that cheap piece of plastic, feeling a lump of humiliation so large in my throat I could barely swallow. When it came time for college, the disparity evolved from a gaping chasm into a total betrayal. My parents proudly announced at a Thanksgiving dinner, in front of all my aunts and uncles, that they had fully funded Caleb's prestigious business degree. They drained a massive chunk of their life savings and took out a second mortgage to ensure their golden boy wouldn't have a single dime of student debt weighing him down. They claimed it was an investment in the family's future. A few years later, I sat them down at that exact same mahogany dining table. I nervously slid an envelope across the wood. It was my acceptance letter to one of the top-tier chemical engineering programs in the country. I had worked tirelessly, pulling straight A's, just praying it would finally make them look at me with the same pride they reserved for Caleb. My father didn't even put down his newspaper. He glanced at the letter over his reading glasses, sighed heavily, and took a sip of his coffee. "That is nice, Julian," Arthur said, his tone flat and utterly dismissive. "But you know we spent the college fund on your brother. We are tapped out. You are going to have to take out student loans. Or maybe look into the local community college first. Chemistry isn't exactly a lucrative career path anyway." I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I had learned long ago that fighting for my parents' affection or resources was a losing battle that only resulted in me being labeled difficult and jealous. So I took out the massive loans. I worked the graveyard shifts at a local diner, serving drunk college kids pancakes at 3 in the morning just to pay for my textbooks. I ground my way through 4 grueling years of university, entirely on my own dime, fueled by a desperate need to prove them wrong. Then, during my senior year, I met Chloe. She was a marketing major. She was radiant, full of life, and had this infectious, loud laugh that made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. For a guy who had spent his entire life being invisible, her undivided attention was an addictive drug. I fell hard and fast. She made me feel seen. We dated for 3 years after graduation. When I finally landed a solid, respectable job as a junior formulator at a boutique fragrance house, I decided it was time. I used every penny of my meager savings to buy her the best diamond ring I could possibly afford. Our wedding was a modest, budget-conscious affair, mostly because I paid for the entire thing myself. My parents contributed absolutely nothing to the budget. In fact, Helen spent the entire reception walking from table to table, loudly complaining to my friends about the rustic venue, the quality of the catered chicken, and the absolute disgrace of not having an open bar. But the worst part of the night, the moment that should have been a massive red flag waving in my face, was Caleb. Caleb had recently launched a tech startup, funded entirely by a massive, high-interest loan my parents had foolishly co-signed for him. He strutted around my wedding reception wearing a custom Italian suit, acting like he was the groom. He commanded the room, loud and obnoxious. During the toasts, he stood up, grabbed the microphone, raised his glass of cheap champagne, and looked directly at my new wife. "To Chloe," Caleb announced, his voice booming over the speakers, echoing off the wooden rafters. A genuinely beautiful woman who somehow, against all logic, settled for the quiet guy in the corner. "Listen, Chloe, if you ever get bored of Julian's little chemistry sets and quiet nights at home, you know where to find a real adventure." He winked at her. Half the room, mostly my family, laughed out loud. My parents actually beamed with pride at his charismatic joke. I sat there at the head table, my face burning with absolute humiliation, gripping the edge of the tablecloth beneath the table so hard my fingers ached. Chloe didn't defend me. She just giggled, a high, breathy sound, and patted my hand gently. Looking back now, with the clarity of hindsight, that little giggle should have been the first blaring siren indicating my life was about to be destroyed. The first 2 years of our marriage were an intense financial struggle. We bought a small, aging starter home in the suburbs, and the monthly mortgage payments ate up a massive chunk of my salary. I was working 60 hours a week, coming home exhausted, desperately trying to climb the corporate ladder and build a solid foundation for our future. Chloe worked as a receptionist at a mid-level real estate firm, but she absolutely hated it. She was obsessed with appearances and status. She spent hours every single night scrolling through social media, staring with deep envy at the luxury vacations, designer handbags, and flawless lives of influencers. Caleb just bought a new Rolex, she casually mentioned one evening over dinner, pushing her pasta around her plate with a fork. He posted a picture of it on a yacht. He says his startup is about to go public. It must be nice not to have to worry about clipping grocery coupons or checking the bank account before buying a pair of shoes. I swallowed the bitter taste rising in the back of my throat. We are building something real, Chloe. Takes time. Slow and steady wins the race. I am up for a promotion next quarter. I know, she sighed, checking her phone screen yet again. It just feels like we are always waiting for our life to actually start. Slowly, insidiously, Caleb started coming around our house more often. He would drop by unannounced on a Tuesday evening or a Saturday afternoon, claiming he was just in the neighborhood, on his way home from important business meetings. He always showed up wearing overpowering, expensive cologne, flashing his new watch, and bringing bottles of expensive imported wine that he knew I could never afford on my salary. He would sit right in the middle of my living room, completely dominating the conversation with wild tales of venture capital meetings and VIP parties, while Chloe sat on the edge of her seat, hanging on his every single word like he was a prophet. I told myself I was just being insecure. I told myself that my childhood trauma, the years of feeling inferior, was making me paranoid and deeply uncharitable. I tried to convince myself that Caleb was my brother, blood of my blood, and Chloe was my devoted wife who stood at the altar and swore vows to me. They were just getting along. It was good that my family liked my wife. I was a complete, utter fool. The breaking point of my entire existence did not arrive with a loud crash or a dramatic confession. It slithered into my life through a casual, completely offhand comment made on a bright Saturday afternoon. Chloe was out of the house. She had told me she was going shopping with her sister in the city and would be gone all day. I was enjoying a rare day off, doing some minor repairs around the house. Around noon, the doorbell rang. It was Sarah, Chloe's best friend since college. She was just dropping by to return a heavy ceramic baking dish she had borrowed a week prior for a potluck. Since I was taking a break anyway, I invited Sarah into the kitchen for a quick cup of coffee. We were standing near the island, chatting amiably about the neighborhood, the weather, and some petty drama going on with the local HOA board, when Sarah suddenly stopped talking. She leaned in slightly, wrinkling her nose, and sniffed the air near my shoulder. "Julian, did you change your cologne recently?" she asked, looking genuinely curious. I frowned, setting my coffee mug down. As a professional perfumer, scent is my entire livelihood. My sense of smell is highly trained, and I am incredibly particular about what I wear. I always wore a very specific, highly refined, subtle blend of cedarwood, vetiver, and bergamot that I had custom-mixed myself. It was light, professional, and unique. "No," I replied, shaking my head. "Same formula I've worn for the last 3 years. Why do you ask?" Sarah looked deeply confused, tilting her head. "That is so weird. When Chloe and I grabbed lunch yesterday afternoon, she smelled completely different. She wasn't wearing that light floral perfume you made for her birthday. She smelled like this really heavy, aggressive, musky scent, almost like a cheap, overpowering men's cologne. It was so strong it gave me a headache. I actually teased her about it, asking if she was wearing your test samples, and she got super defensive and snapped at me to mind my own business. My blood literally turned to ice water in my veins. A heavy, aggressive, musky men's scent. Caleb wore a very specific, highly commercial, overly aggressive cologne. It was a vile, overpowering mix of synthetic amber, cheap patchouli, and synthetic musk. It was the kind of arrogant smell that announced his presence before he entered a room and lingered in an elevator for 20 minutes long after he had left. It was the exact, undeniable scent I had caught very faint whiffs of on Chloe's clothes when I was doing the laundry over the past few months. But every time, I had stupidly convinced myself it was just from standing next to men on the crowded subway commute or sitting in a busy restaurant. "Right?" I managed to say, forcing my facial muscles into a tight, incredibly fake smile. My heart was pounding so hard I thought Sarah could hear it. I spilled a whole tray of aggressive synthetic test samples in my car the other day. It was a mess. It probably rubbed off heavily on her jacket when I drove her to the station. Sarah nodded, completely buying the logical excuse, and left shortly after to run her errands. I walked her to the door, locked it behind her, and stood dead center in the middle of my kitchen. The silence of my small house was suddenly deafening, oppressive. My mind raced at 1,000,000 miles an hour, connecting dots I had desperately tried to ignore. The late nights at the office where she wouldn't answer her phone. The sudden, obsessive interest in upgrading her wardrobe with clothes we couldn't afford. The secretive texting where she would turn her phone screen away from me. The way Caleb always magically seemed to know my exact work schedule, asking when I was on night shifts. I felt physically sick. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, taking deep, shuddering breaths. I needed absolute proof. I refused to confront my wife and blow up my marriage based on a passing comment about a smell. If I was wrong, the accusation would destroy us anyway. But if I was right... 2 weeks later, the universe decided to stop playing games and handed me the definitive proof on a silver platter. I was scheduled to be in Chicago for a major, 3-day international fragrance expo. It was a huge opportunity for my career. My flight was booked for a Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. I kissed Chloe goodbye at 5 a.m. while she was still half asleep in bed, grabbed my luggage, and took an Uber to the airport. But an hour before boarding, while I was sitting at the terminal gate drinking overpriced coffee, my boss, Mr. Henderson, called my cell phone. "Julian, turn around and go home," Henderson said, sounding frustrated. The primary client we were presenting to in Chicago just had a massive family medical emergency. The whole expo pitch is pushed back by a full week. I'll get the company to refund your flight. Take the next few days off, you've earned it. I grabbed my carry-on bag and headed straight to the taxi stand. I pulled my phone out to call Chloe and tell her the good news, that we could have a surprise date night. But a dark, twisted, paranoid knot in my gut told me to put the phone away. Go home unannounced. See what happens when she thinks you are 1,000 miles away. The Uber dropped me off at the end of my street around 11 in the morning. The neighborhood was quiet, most people away at work. My heart started hammering against my ribs, a loud, violent thud, the moment my house came into view. Parked boldly right in the middle of my driveway was a sleek, black, brand-new luxury Mercedes sedan. It wasn't Caleb's usual sports car, but I knew for a fact he frequently rented high-end luxury vehicles to Project Success when meeting with potential investors. I walked toward my own front door feeling like a criminal, like a thief breaking into my own life. I slipped the house key into the lock, turning the metal with agonizing slowness to avoid making even the slightest click. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was dead quiet. I took off my shoes and walked silently into the hallway. And then I heard it, a low, muffled, undeniably intimate laugh coming from upstairs, coming from my master bedroom. I gripped the wooden banister of the staircase so hard my knuckles turned a bruised, painful shade of white. Every single step up those carpeted stairs felt like I was wading through waist-deep, wet concrete. The blood was roaring in my ears, a rushing sound that drowned out everything else. I reached the second-floor landing. The door to our bedroom was slightly ajar, maybe 2 inches open. I stepped up to the narrow gap and looked inside. There is a very specific kind of psychological pain that does not register physically at first. It doesn't hurt immediately. It just instantly burns out your entire nervous system, leaving you entirely numb, floating outside of your own body, watching a nightmare unfold. I saw my brother, my own flesh and blood, the man I shared a childhood with. He was tangled in the expensive cotton sheets I had bought with my hard-earned money, violently violating the sanctity of my home, with the woman I had promised my life and soul to. They weren't just sleeping together. They were laughing. They were comfortable. They were relaxed. This was not a drunken, one-time mistake. This was a well-rehearsed routine. I placed my hand flat on the wood and pushed the door open. It hit the drywall behind it with a loud, violent crack that echoed through the entire house. They scrambled instantly. Chloe shrieked, a high-pitched sound of absolute terror, yanking the heavy duvet up to cover her bare chest, her eyes wide, wild, and panicked. Caleb froze mid-motion, staring at me. For one brief, satisfying second, I saw genuine, primal fear flash in his eyes. He thought I was going to kill him, but then, true to his disgusting, narcissistic nature, the fear vanished, instantly replaced by that familiar, arrogant, sickening smirk. He actually ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, acting completely, terrifyingly unbothered by the fact that his brother had just caught him destroying a marriage. "Julian," Caleb said, his voice sickeningly calm, laced with amusement. "You are home incredibly early. Flight get cancelled due to weather." I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I didn't lunge forward and throw punches. I felt a cold, terrifying, absolute calm wash over every inch of my body. It was the calm of a man who realized he had nothing left to lose. "Get out of my house," I said, my voice eerily steady, barely above a whisper, yet carrying the weight of a death sentence. Chloe started hyperventilating, real, ugly tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. Fake, pathetic, manipulative tears. "Julian, oh my God, Julian, please, please, you have to let me explain. It is not what you think. It was a mistake. I swear to God it meant nothing. A mistake." I took one slow, deliberate step further into the room. The air smelled strongly of his vile cologne and her betrayal. "You trip and accidentally fall into his lap, Chloe, multiple times? Do not insult my intelligence. Both of you, get dressed right now and get the hell out of my house." Caleb sighed dramatically, slowly swinging his legs over the side of the bed, grabbing his expensive tailored trousers from the floor. He looked at me, no longer bothering to hide his absolute contempt and superiority. "Oh, come on. Let's not do the dramatic, deeply wounded husband routine, Julian," Caleb sneered, casually buckling his designer leather belt. "You knew this was coming eventually. Look in the mirror. You can't provide for a high-maintenance woman like Chloe. Look at this tiny, pathetic house. Look at your miserable, stagnant salary. Mom and Dad always said you were far too weak to hold on to anything of real value. I'm honestly just doing you a favor, putting her out of her misery before she wastes her best years on a loser." The casual mention of my parents made my stomach drop into a bottomless abyss. "What the hell does that mean? Mom and Dad?" Caleb laughed, a cruel, sharp, barking laugh that cut me to the bone. "You honestly think they don't know? Come on, Julian, don't be naive. They prefer her with me. They always have. Hell, Dad even joked over Thanksgiving drinks that I was finally upgrading the family gene pool by taking over." I slowly turned my head and looked at Chloe. She was staring firmly at the floor, sobbing hysterically into her hands, entirely unable to meet my eyes. She didn't scream a denial. She didn't call him a liar. My parents knew. My own parents, the people who brought me into this world, knew my wife was eagerly sleeping with my brother, and they said absolutely nothing to protect me. "You have exactly 10 minutes to pack whatever fits into 2 suitcases, I said to Chloe, my voice devoid of any human emotion. "Whatever is left in this house after today goes directly into a rented dumpster. And Caleb, if I ever see your face near my property again, I won't just tell you to leave. I will break every bone in your body." I turned my back on them, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing the tears forming in my eyes. I walked downstairs with heavy, deliberate steps. I sat in the living room, staring blankly at a dead television screen, listening to the frantic, panicked sounds of packing above me. When the front door finally clicked shut 20 minutes later, leaving me completely, utterly alone in the crushing silence, I didn't cry. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket, my hands shaking slightly, and dialed my mother's number. The phone rang 3 times before Helen answered. Her voice was bright, chirpy, and entirely too cheerful for a Tuesday morning. "Julian, sweetheart, how is Chicago? Is it freezing? Did you land that big corporate account for the company?" I gripped the phone tightly, my fingernails digging painfully into my palm. "The trip was canceled. I came home early, Mom." I walked into my bedroom and caught Chloe and Caleb in my bed. There was a long, suffocating, terrifyingly heavy silence on the other end of the line. I waited for the maternal shock. I waited for the outrage. I waited for my mother to scream in horror, to ask how this could possibly happen, to viciously condemn her oldest son for destroying her youngest son's life and marriage. Instead, she let out a long, heavy sigh. It wasn't a sigh of grief or empathy. It was a sigh of profound annoyance, like I had just informed her I forgot to buy milk at the grocery store. "Look, Julian," Helen said, her tone suddenly cautious, defensive, and deeply patronizing. "These things are complicated. Adult relationships are messy. Your brother has been under a tremendous amount of stress lately with his new startup, and Chloe, well, you know she has very expensive tastes and high expectations. Honestly, we always felt you two were never really a good match anyway. You are too quiet for her." I closed my eyes. The reality of the betrayal was a massive physical weight pressing down violently on my chest, threatening to crush my lungs. "You knew. You actually knew this was happening behind my back. Do not take that accusatory tone with me, young man," she snapped, instantly pivoting to anger to deflect her guilt. "We didn't orchestrate anything. We didn't force them into bed. But Caleb is going places, Julian. He is going to be a millionaire. He needs a wife who knows how to navigate those high society circles and host corporate dinners. Be reasonable about this. Do not make a huge family scandal out of it. You can move on quietly. I'm sure you'll find a nice, quiet, simple girl who suits your boring lifestyle much better." I felt nauseous. "I have nowhere to go," I said, testing the waters one final time, desperate to see if even a microscopic shred of maternal instinct remained in her cold heart. "The house is in both our names. I have to call a lawyer to figure out the divorce. I can't stay here tonight. I need a place to crash and clear my head. Can I come stay in my old room at your place for a few days?" "Oh, honey," Helen said quickly, far too quickly, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "That is really not a good idea right now. We are actively renovating the guest bathroom, and the entire house is just a complete disaster zone. There is drywall dust everywhere. You have allergies, you would absolutely hate it. Why don't you just book a cheap motel?" They had lived in that house for 30 years and hadn't changed a single light bulb or painted a wall, let alone renovated an entire bathroom. She was lying through her teeth to protect Caleb's comfort. "Right. Enjoy the renovation," I said, and hung up the phone. I didn't realize the true, horrific depth of their betrayal until 2 days later. I was sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by moving boxes, sorting through a massive pile of mail as I prepared to contact a ruthless divorce lawyer. Among the junk mail and grocery flyers was a thick paper credit card statement addressed directly to Chloe. In her rush to pack, she had forgotten to forward her mail. I opened it. I knew I shouldn't have, it was a violation of privacy, but I was desperately looking for ammunition for the divorce proceedings. My eyes scanned the long list of charges, and my heart stopped cold on a massive line item from a month prior. A 5-night stay at a 5-star luxury ski resort in Aspen. The cost was astronomical, nearly a quarter of my yearly salary. But the card hadn't been paid off from our joint checking account. There was a payment confirmation receipt stapled to the back, showing the massive balance had been cleared entirely by an external bank wire transfer. I recognized the routing number instantly. It was my father's primary business account. My parents hadn't just looked the other way. They hadn't just remained silent. They had actively, financially funded my wife's affair with my brother. They had literally paid for the luxury hotel suite where Caleb and Chloe went to betray me while I was working overtime to pay our mortgage. The anger I felt at that exact moment transcended normal human rage. It wasn't hot and explosive. It was a cold, absolute, terrifying clarity. I was completely alone in this world. The family I was born into was a malignant cancer, and the only way to survive was to cut it out completely and burn the wound shut. But Caleb wasn't done destroying me. He wanted total annihilation. On Monday morning, I walked into the laboratory at my company, ready to bury myself in complex chemical formulas and forget my life existed. Instead, before I even put on my lab coat, I was called into the glass office of Mr. Henderson, the director of operations. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He stared fixedly at a pen on his desk. "Julian, take a seat," Mr. Henderson said, his voice tight. He shuffled some termination paperwork nervously. "I'll get straight to the painful point. We are letting you go. Effective immediately. HR is packing your desk." I stared at him in absolute shock, the room spinning slightly. "What? Why? I have increased our successful market formulations by 30% this quarter alone. My performance reviews have been flawless for 3 years. I was supposed to get a promotion next month." Henderson sighed, rubbing his temples, looking genuinely pained but resolute. "It is not about your performance, Julian. You are a brilliant formulator. It is about corporate optics and survival. We just secured a massive, multi-million-dollar investment from a major venture capital group to expand our manufacturing." He paused, swallowing hard. Caleb's venture capital group. He personally made it very, very clear to the board of directors that his firm will pull the funding entirely and publicly ruin our reputation if you remain on the payroll in any capacity. "I am so sorry, Julian. My hands are tied. It is strictly business." My own brother had used his startup's newly acquired capital to maliciously strong-arm my boss into firing me. He wanted me completely broken. He wanted me financially ruined. He wanted me begging on my knees for scraps. I left the corporate building carrying a small, pathetic cardboard box containing a mug and a few desk plants. I sat in my car in the parking lot and called David, my best friend since our freshman year of college. The guy who stood as my best man at my wedding. I needed a drink. I needed a couch to sleep on while I figured out the divorce logistics and applied for unemployment. David answered on the second ring, his voice low and hesitant. "Hey, Jules. Listen, man. I heard what happened with Chloe. It's wild. I'm so sorry. Can I come over, Dave? I just got fired." Caleb threatened Henderson. "I am losing my mind." David cleared his throat nervously, the sound of a coward preparing to run. "Actually, Julian, that is kind of what I wanted to talk to you about. Caleb reached out to me yesterday afternoon. He offered me a senior director position at his new tech firm. It's double my current salary, plus stock options. I can't really afford to be seen associating with you right now, man. If Caleb finds out I'm helping you, he'll pull the offer. You know how it is. I have a mortgage. I have kids." I didn't scream at him. I didn't beg. I just ended the call, staring blankly at the steering wheel. In the span of 5 agonizing days, I had lost my wife, my family, my career, my income, and my best friend. I was sitting alone in a hot asphalt parking lot, holding a box of cheap office supplies, utterly eradicated from my own life. They expected me to fold. They expected the quiet, invisible backup child to finally fade away into total obscurity, ruined, depressed, and permanently defeated. They expected me to become a tragic, pathetic cautionary tale they could whisper about at dinner parties to make Caleb look even more powerful and successful by comparison. Instead, gripping that steering wheel until my hands cramped, I made a silent, unbreakable vow. I wasn't going to shed another tear. I wasn't going to ask a single soul for help. I was going to take the tiny severance package Henderson gave me. I was going to finalize the divorce, and I was going to build a machine of absolute, undeniable destruction. I was going to take everything from them. I thought the worst part of my life was finally over. I was so incredibly wrong, because the journey I was about to embark on would set the stage for the most explosive, devastating confrontation of my entire life. The 2 years immediately following my divorce and my brutal termination from the only career I had ever known were, without a doubt, the darkest, most grueling and isolating days of my entire life. I took the pathetic, insulting severance check that Mr. Henderson handed me, combined it with the absolute pennies I received from selling my half of the marital home to my cheating brother, and I completely vanished from their world. I changed my phone number. I deleted all my social media. I blocked my parents' emails. I blocked Caleb. I blocked every single mutual friend or extended family member who dared to reach out on their behalf to tell me to be the bigger person. There was no bigger person anymore. There was only survival. I rented a freezing, windowless industrial unit in a rundown commercial real estate park on the absolute desolate edge of the city. There was no central heating. The concrete floor was perpetually damp, and the air always smelled faintly of motor oil from the mechanic shop next door. I slept on a cheap air mattress surrounded by massive plastic drums of ethanol, raw essential oils, and highly volatile synthetic aromatics. I poured every waking second, every ounce of my broken heart, and every fraction of my sanity into my craft. I was a man possessed by the singular, burning, obsessive desire to build a massive empire out of the ashes they had so casually left behind. I was going to create a luxury fragrance brand that would completely dominate the market. While I was freezing in a warehouse, wearing 3 layers of thrift store sweaters just to keep my hands steady enough to mix my formulas, Caleb was aggressively, shamelessly living the lie. Through the unavoidable industry grapevine, I heard exactly what was happening with his so-called brilliant tech startup. It was bleeding cash at an unprecedented rate. He had massively overpromised on his software capabilities to his board of directors and was actively facing a devastating lawsuit from his primary investors for breach of contract and financial negligence. But Caleb, being the ultimate textbook narcissist, doubled down on the grand illusion of success. He absolutely refused to cut his lavish lifestyle. He and Chloe were renting a sprawling luxury penthouse downtown that cost more per month than most people make in a year. He was driving a bright yellow Lamborghini that I knew for an absolute fact was leased at an exorbitant monthly rate he could not afford. He was desperately trying to fake it until he made it, aggressively networking, hoping to lure in a massive new round of venture capital funding before the entire house of cards collapsed and buried him. My parents, completely blind to his impending financial ruin and dazzled by the leased supercar, continued to parade him around their country club as the ultimate American success story. They bragged to anyone who would listen about their genius golden boy, completely erasing my existence from their narrative. My breakthrough did not happen with a loud explosion. It came quietly, and then all at once, like a tidal wave. I spent 12 agonizing months perfecting a highly complex, aggressively masculine fragrance line. It utilized incredibly rare, ethically sourced oud wood, dark amber, and a specifically smoked vanilla note. It was sophisticated, it was dark, and it was utterly intoxicating. Smelled like raw power and old money. I managed to negotiate a deal to get a very small batch of 50 bottles into a high-end, highly exclusive independent boutique in Los Angeles. A week later, Evelyn, a highly respected lifestyle and grooming blogger with millions of affluent, dedicated followers, walked into that specific boutique. She bought a bottle as an anniversary gift for her husband. 2 days later, she posted a glowing, highly emotional 10-minute video review calling my creation the most revolutionary, captivating men's scent of the decade. My business phone did not stop ringing for 3 consecutive months. Wholesale orders flooded in faster than I could physically mix the compounds. I took the initial profits and hired a brilliant, hungry young assistant named Noah, who had a mind for logistics. We scaled up aggressively. I moved out of the freezing warehouse and purchased a massive, state-of-the-art manufacturing facility outright. I didn't just build a brand. I systematically built an entire supply chain to ensure nobody could ever cut me out of the market again. And during this incredible, dizzying rise to the top, I met Isabella. She was the lead corporate supply chain logistics manager for one of my primary European glass bottle distributors. Where Chloe was superficial, demanding, and obsessed with status, Isabella was sharp, intensely loyal, fiercely intelligent, and completely grounded in reality. She learned about my past. She knew about the brutal betrayal, the divorce, the family abandonment. Instead of judging me or offering empty platitudes about forgiveness, she stood shoulder to shoulder with me in the corporate trenches. She helped me optimize my operations, negotiate massive shipping contracts, and build my fortress brick by brick. We became inseparable, bound by mutual respect and an undeniable, deep connection. By the end of the second year, my independent company was evaluating a massive, life-changing acquisition offer from a global luxury retail conglomerate headed by a man named Marcus. Marcus was a titan in the industry, a ruthless but fair billionaire who controlled the high-end distribution channels of the world's most elite brands. After months of grueling negotiations with a team of high-powered lawyers, we finally closed the deal. It made me incredibly wealthy. Wealthy enough that my old corporate salary looked like absolute pocket change. Wealthy enough to ensure my future children would never have to worry about a college fund. To officially celebrate the partnership and launch the brand globally, Marcus insisted we throw a massive, highly exclusive gala at the city's most prestigious museum of modern art. It was a strict invitation-only event for the absolute elite of the city. Angel investors, politicians, A-list celebrities, and top-tier financial media. This is exactly where the trap was set. Through my new, extensive corporate network, I knew Caleb's tech firm was on absolute life support. He was drowning in debt and desperately hunting for a corporate buyer. Specifically, he was looking for a massive retail distribution network to acquire his struggling logistics software to save him from bankruptcy. I also knew he had been begging Marcus's conglomerate for a simple 5-minute meeting for 6 months and getting completely ignored. So I pulled a string. I personally made sure Caleb received a VIP golden ticket invitation to the gala. I also sent physical, wax-sealed invitations to my parents' small apartment. I wanted them all in that room. I wanted them to walk blindly into the lion's den, completely intoxicated by the glamour, entirely unaware of exactly who owned the pride they were walking into. The night of the gala was electric. The museum was shut down to the public and bathed in soft, expensive amber lighting. Classical music echoed through the halls. Waiters in impeccably tailored tuxedos carried silver trays of vintage champagne that cost more than my first car. The air smelled strongly of expensive floral arrangements and the deep, rich notes of my signature fragrance. I was standing near the top of the grand marble staircase, wearing a custom-tailored bespoke suit imported from Milan, holding a crystal glass of sparkling water. Isabella was standing next to me, her hand resting gently on my arm, looking absolutely breathtaking in a sleek, elegant black evening gown. At exactly 8 o'clock they arrived. I watched from the shadows of the balcony as the heavy glass front doors opened. Caleb walked in first. He was wearing a flashy, overly tailored velvet jacket that screamed of financial desperation and a desperate need to be noticed. Chloe was clinging tightly to his arm, heavily pregnant, wearing a designer dress that barely fit her swelling figure. Her eyes were darting frantically around the room, desperately cataloging the immense wealth, the jewelry, and the power surrounding her. My parents trailed right behind them. Arthur and Helen looked completely out of place, clutching their cheap coats, visibly intimidated by the sheer scale of the billionaires in the room. They gravitated immediately toward the main bar, completely oblivious to my presence on the staircase overlooking the entire floor. Caleb immediately started aggressively networking, practically shoving his cheap business cards into the hands of anyone wearing a Rolex, laughing far too loudly, acting like he owned the entire building. Chloe stood by the bar, ordering expensive imported cocktails on the open tab, looking incredibly bored and exhausted. I took a deep, centering breath, handed my glass to a passing waiter, kissed Isabella gently on the cheek, and walked slowly down the sweeping marble stairs. I timed my approach absolutely perfectly. Caleb was right in the middle of telling a loud, highly exaggerated story about his software to a polite but clearly disinterested hedge fund manager. "Enjoying the vintage champagne, Caleb?" I asked, my voice cutting through his loud, obnoxious laughter like a sharpened blade. Caleb froze mid-sentence. He slowly turned around, his eyes widening slightly as they locked onto my face. He looked me up and down. But because his ego was so incredibly massive, so entirely impenetrable and delusional, he didn't register the $10,000 bespoke suit. He didn't register the absolute, unwavering confidence radiating from my posture. He looked at the prestigious venue, looked at me, and his narcissistic brain automatically jumped to the most insulting, demeaning conclusion possible to protect his fragile reality. "Julian," Caleb laughed, a harsh, incredibly mocking sound. He turned back to the hedge fund manager with a wide grin. "This is my little brother. I haven't seen him in years. Wow, Julian, are you working the catering staff tonight? Or did Marcus just hire you to stand by the front door and check coats for the real guests? Hey, no shame in honest work. It's good to see you finally have a steady job after you got fired. A steady salary is important when you're starting over from nothing." Chloe turned around, her jaw dropping slightly. She looked at me, taking in my immaculate appearance, a flicker of genuine, terrifying confusion crossing her face. My parents, hearing the loud commotion and recognizing my voice, hurried over from the buffet table. Helen gasped loudly, putting a dramatic hand over her chest. "Julian, what on earth are you doing here?" Helen demanded, her voice hushed but venomous, looking around nervously as if my mere presence was a contagious disease that was going to embarrass them in front of the elite. "This is a highly exclusive corporate event. Did you sneak in through the kitchen? Please tell me you aren't going to cause a dramatic scene. Caleb is trying to secure a very important, life-changing meeting with investors tonight. Do not ruin this for him because you are still bitter about the divorce." I looked directly at my mother, the woman who boldly lied about a bathroom renovation to keep her homeless, devastated son out of the freezing rain. I looked at my father, the man who quietly wired thousands of dollars to fund the total destruction of my marriage. "I am not working the catering, Caleb," I said, my voice dangerously calm, devoid of any anger, only absolute certainty. "And I did not sneak in through the kitchen, Mom. I am exactly where I am supposed to be." Caleb rolled his eyes dramatically, taking a large sip of his drink and shaking his head. "Right? Sure you are, buddy. Listen, Jules, I really don't have time to entertain your pathetic underdog complex tonight. I am waiting for Marcus, the billionaire CEO of this entire operation. We are actively discussing a multimillion-dollar software acquisition that will secure my legacy. So why don't you be a good little brother, run along to the kitchens, and fetch me a fresh plate of crab cakes? And maybe grab some napkins. My pregnant wife spilled her drink on the bar." He smirked at me. It was that exact same sickening, arrogant, deeply cruel smirk from the day I caught him in my bed. He felt entirely invincible. He was standing in a room full of billionaires, convinced he was exactly one handshake away from joining their ranks, and completely convinced I was nothing but the dirt to be scraped off his expensive Italian leather shoes. He had absolutely no idea that he had just walked blindly, arrogantly, and directly into the dead center of the minefield. And I held the detonator. The ambient, buzzing noise in the crowded museum seemed to fade into a dull, distant hum in my ears. I stood perfectly still, my posture completely relaxed, letting Caleb's pathetic insults hang in the heavy air between us. I wanted him to feel the absolute, dizzying peak of his arrogance. I wanted him to climb as high as he possibly could up that ladder of delusion before I completely shattered the rungs beneath him. Suddenly, a sharp, incredibly commanding voice rang out over the main high-fidelity speaker system, echoing powerfully off the high, vaulted ceilings of the museum. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, if I could please have your undivided attention near the main stage." The massive crowd murmured in anticipation and began to shift naturally toward the center of the room, where a brightly lit platform had been erected in front of a priceless modern art installation. Caleb puffed out his chest, aggressively adjusting his velvet lapels and clearing his throat. "That's Marcus," Caleb said, turning to Chloe with a greedy, feverish gleam in his eye. "He completely ignored me. Watch and learn, Julian. Pay attention. This is how real corporate business is done by the big players." Caleb confidently, almost aggressively, pushed his way through the crowd of billionaires and socialites, dragging Chloe by the hand and waving for my parents to follow him closely toward the absolute front of the stage. He wanted to be seen. I followed them slowly at my own measured pace, Isabella emerged from the crowd and slipped her warm hand seamlessly into mine. We stood just to the side of the main platform, partially obscured by a massive, extravagant floral arrangement, waiting in the wings. Marcus stepped up confidently to the microphone. He was an older, incredibly distinguished man with silver hair and a meticulously tailored charcoal suit that commanded absolute authority. The entire room of powerful people fell completely, respectfully silent. "Thank you all for joining us tonight in this truly magnificent venue," Marcus began, his voice smooth, powerful, and deeply resonant. "Tonight is not just a standard corporate celebration of luxury goods. It is a celebration of immense resilience, of unapologetic brilliance, and of relentless, game-changing innovation. For the past year, our global conglomerate has been searching extensively for a brand that truly understands the complex modern market. We were looking for a brand built not on inherited wealth, not on empty venture capital promises, and certainly not on corporate theft, but on absolute, undeniable raw talent." I watched Caleb from my vantage point. He was nodding along in the very front row, a massive, arrogant grin plastered across his face. He looked incredibly smug, entirely and utterly convinced that Marcus was speaking generally about the aggressive business principles Caleb falsely claimed to possess. He thought this was his moment. "We found that rare talent," Marcus continued, a slight, knowing smile playing on his lips as his eyes scanned the crowd. "We recently finalized an enormous acquisition and partnership deal that will completely, fundamentally reshape our global fragrance and grooming division for the next decade. But that is not all. Alongside this incredible merger, I am thrilled to publicly announce tonight that our new brilliant partner has also aggressively expanded his own personal portfolio by acquiring the regional logistics and software distribution network, the very network that powers our entire retail operations across the coast." Caleb's smug smile faltered slightly, a microscopic twitch in his jaw. The regional logistics network. That was the exact, specific company Caleb was desperately trying to sell his failing software to. It was his only lifeline to avoid total bankruptcy. If Marcus's new unknown partner owned it, Caleb had to impress this mysterious billionaire immediately. "It is my absolute honor, and my great personal privilege," Marcus said, his voice rising in volume, extending his arm gracefully toward the side of the stage where Isabella and I were standing in the shadows, "to introduce the founder, the creative genius, and as of this morning, the majority shareholder of our newest global division. Please, ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome for my friend and my new equal business partner, Julian." The massive, blinding theatrical spotlight snapped instantly from Marcus and hit me dead in the face. The applause in the room erupted, deafening and enthusiastic. The crowd of elite investors parted respectfully, creating a clear path for me. I let go of Isabella's hand, gave her a brief smile, and walked with slow, deliberate confidence up the 3 short steps onto the stage. I shook Marcus's hand firmly, leaning in for a brief, professional embrace. Then I stepped up to the microphone. I did not look at the wealthy investors. I did not look at the flashing cameras of the media. I looked directly, purposefully down into the front row. I looked dead into Caleb's eyes. The color had completely, instantaneously drained from his face, leaving him looking like a sick, pale ghost. His jaw was literally slack, hanging open in utter disbelief. His eyes were wide, darting frantically between me standing behind the podium, the microphone, and Marcus, as if his brain was violently, physically rejecting the reality of the situation unfolding before him. Chloe looked like she had just been physically struck by a speeding truck. She gripped Caleb's arm so tightly her knuckles were stark white, her mouth opening and closing rapidly like a fish out of water, without a single sound coming out. My parents looked utterly, fundamentally terrified. Arthur's face was ashen, his hands trembling visibly at his sides. Helen was shaking violently, staring up at me as if I were a vengeful demon that had returned from the absolute depths of hell to demand their souls. "Thank you, Marcus, for that incredibly generous introduction," I said into the microphone, my voice perfectly steady, amplified with crystal clarity across the massive room. It is truly incredible to stand here tonight among so many titans of industry. Building this empire was not an easy journey. Exactly 2 years ago, I lost absolutely everything. My career, my home, my entire financial foundation, and my marriage. I was told repeatedly by the very people closest to me that I was weak. I was told I could never provide for a family. I was told that my passions were worthless and that I was nothing more than a backup plan. I saw Caleb physically shrink back into the dense crowd. He was sweating profusely now, the arrogant facade completely shattered into a million irreparable pieces. But during those dark days, I learned a very valuable, fundamental lesson about corporate investments. I continued, my eyes locked onto my trembling brother, ensuring he felt every single word like a physical blow. I learned that you should never, ever invest in toxic, bad assets. For example, overvalued, poorly managed tech startups built entirely on predatory bank loans, massive ego, and stolen ideas. In fact, as the new owner of the regional logistics network, my very first executive decision this afternoon was to permanently and irrevocably terminate all acquisition talks with a failing local firm that has been begging us for a financial bailout. The crowd went dead silent. The tension was palpable. A firm run by a man who prefers to steal from his own family rather than do an honest day's work, I stated, my voice echoing like thunder. The whispers in the crowd started immediately, a low, buzzing crescendo of gossip. The corporate sharks in the room were smart. They smelled blood in the water. They were all looking around, trying to figure out exactly who the dead man walking was. Caleb knew. Caleb knew exactly who it was. He was staring at the floor, absolutely humiliated in front of the exact people he had spent his entire life trying to impress. I am standing here tonight to prove, definitively, that absolute integrity, unbreakable resilience, and relentless hard work will always, inevitably outlast arrogance, manipulation, and deceit. I concluded, gripping the edges of the podium. Please, enjoy the vintage champagne. Enjoy the beautiful evening. And to my family standing right there in the front row, I sincerely hope you enjoy the crab cakes. I stepped back from the microphone. The applause erupted again, but it was a completely different kind of applause. It wasn't polite corporate clapping. It was the sound of absolute, unquestionable victory. It was the sound of a king reclaiming his stolen throne. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far. You're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. As I walked down the stage steps, the crowd immediately swarmed me. Congratulations, firm handshakes, business cards thrust into my hands. But out of the corner of my eye, through the sea of expensive suits, I saw the exact, beautiful moment the private security team approached Caleb. Marcus did not tolerate uninvited drama, frauds, or liabilities at his highly publicized events. 2 massive, imposing men in black suits flanked my brother, stepping into his personal space, speaking quietly but incredibly aggressively into his ear. Caleb tried to argue. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his face turning a furious, ugly, mottled shade of red. He was shouting something about being my brother, demanding respect. But the security guards didn't care about his lineage. They simply grabbed his arms with practiced force and began forcibly escorting him backward, marching him rapidly toward the service exit near the kitchens. Chloe stumbled awkwardly behind him in her painful designer heels, crying hysterically, trying desperately to hide her face behind her purse from the flashing cameras of the media photographers who had instantly sensed a massive, juicy scandal. It was, without a shadow of a doubt, the most beautiful, deeply satisfying thing I had ever witnessed in my entire life. As the heavy service doors swung shut, officially ejecting Caleb and Chloe into the cold, unforgiving alleyway behind the museum, the immediate aftermath inside the gala was chaotic. The corporate vultures were already texting their brokers, ensuring no one touched Caleb's tech firm with a 10-foot pole. His reputation, his entire fragile identity built on the perception of success, was completely obliterated in less than 5 minutes. Through the dense crowd of well-wishers and billionaires, I saw my parents desperately, frantically trying to push their way toward me. They were acting like drowning victims fighting for a life raft. Helen had thick, black mascara tears streaming down her face. Real tears this time, tears of absolute, unadulterated panic and terror. They had bet their entire lives, their social reputation, their retirement fund, and their ultimate financial security on the Golden Horse. And the Golden Horse hadn't just broken its leg out of the starting gate. It had completely exploded on the track. "Julian, Julian, please wait," Helen cried out, practically shoving a wealthy investor aside to reach me. She grabbed my arm with a desperate, claw-like grip. "We need to talk. You don't understand. Sweetheart. We never wanted any of this to happen. We are so incredibly proud of you. Look at what you've built. Family is family, Julian, you have to talk to us. We can fix this." I stopped walking. I didn't yell. I didn't cause a scene. I looked down at her trembling hand gripping the sleeve of my incredibly expensive suit. I didn't shake it off. I just stared at it, my eyes cold and entirely dead, until the sheer weight of my silent contempt forced her to slowly, nervously pull her hand away. "There is no family here," I said, my voice low, sharp, and cold enough to freeze boiling water. I spoke quietly so only she and my pale, trembling father could hear me over the classical music. "You funded his affair with my wife. You lied to me about a bathroom renovation when I was standing in your driveway, homeless and destroyed. You told me I was a failure. You drained my college fund and mortgaged your own future inheritance to fund a complete fraud. You are strangers to me. If you ever, for the rest of your miserable lives, attempt to contact me again, I will have my corporate lawyer draft a restraining order so severe you won't be able to breathe in the same zip code as me." I turned my back on them without waiting for a response, offered my arm to Isabella, and walked away into the crowd of people who actually respected me. I never spoke a single word to my parents again. The fallout from that fateful night was not just severe. It was catastrophic, a swift, brutal, and entirely merciless demolition of the fake life Caleb had built on the ruins of mine. Word spread rapidly and aggressively through the financial sector about my very public, very targeted dismantling of his company. The primary investors, who were already furious about his massive software delays and broken promises, finally pulled the trigger. They hit Caleb with a massive multimillion-dollar lawsuit for blatant fraud, gross mismanagement of venture capital funds, and breach of fiduciary duty. The venture capital firm immediately seized his business accounts. 2 days later, the bank aggressively repossessed the bright yellow Lamborghini right out of the driveway of his luxury penthouse in broad daylight, while his neighbors watched. 2 weeks after that, unable to pay the astronomical rent, they were formally evicted. Caleb was completely, utterly, and irrevocably bankrupt. But the universe, it seemed, wasn't quite finished dispensing poetic justice. The true, absolute, mind-bending irony of the entire situation came crashing down on him about a month later, a final nail in the coffin of his ego. When the venture capital money dried up and the luxury lifestyle vanished overnight, Chloe's supposed undying loyalty to the better brother evaporated instantly. She didn't sign up for poverty. She signed up for the illusion of limitless wealth and country club dinners. She packed her designer bags and left Caleb sitting alone in a cheap, depressing, roach-infested motel room on the outskirts of the city. But before she walked out the door, she dropped the ultimate world-shattering bombshell. The baby she was carrying, the child Caleb had proudly paraded around as his heir, wasn't his. During the frantic, highly stressful months when Caleb's business was quietly failing and he was taking his intense financial anger out on her behind closed doors, Chloe had sought comfort exactly the way she always did, by finding someone with a significantly larger bank account. She had been secretly sleeping with one of Caleb's older, married, extremely wealthy angel investors. The baby was the undeniable product of that affair. the investor, wanting absolutely nothing to do with a public scandal or a messy, drawn-out custody battle that would ruin his own marriage, paid for a ruthless, high-powered lawyer who completely terrified Chloe into silence with ironclad non-disclosure agreements and a meager monthly stipend. Caleb had maliciously thrown away his loyal brother, completely destroyed his professional reputation, and nuked his entire future just to steal a woman who immediately cheated on him and stuck him with another man's child the exact second the going got tough. The sheer poetry of the betrayal was staggering. When the absolute truth came out, Caleb suffered a complete, documented psychological breakdown. The untouchable golden child, the invincible king of the family, was reduced to a crying, broken, heavily medicated shell of a man. He was fighting a massive corporate lawsuit with a completely overworked public defender because he couldn't afford a real lawyer. And my parents? They certainly didn't escape the devastating wreckage. Because they had foolishly, blindly co-signed the massive, high-interest original business loans for Caleb's tech startup years ago. The furious bank came directly after their personal assets when Caleb defaulted. The crushing, insurmountable debt wiped out their life savings entirely in a matter of weeks. They were forced to hastily sell their massive, beautiful suburban home, the house I grew up in, the house they refused to let me stay in, for a fraction of its value just to avoid total, humiliating bankruptcy. They moved into a cramped, depressing, heavily outdated one-bedroom apartment in a very bad neighborhood with high crime rates. My father, a man who prided himself on his golf handicap, had to come out of retirement and take a grueling, minimum-wage job greeting aggressive customers at a big-box hardware store just to afford basic groceries and his blood pressure medication. Every single time I thought about my mother complaining about the fake dust from the renovation of her guest bathroom, I pictured her sitting in that tiny, suffocating apartment, staring at the peeling wallpaper, deeply realizing she had sacrificed her only honest, loyal son for a complete, utter illusion. It felt like attending the funeral of the people they used to be. I didn't shed a single tear. I didn't mourn them. I felt nothing but the profound satisfaction of a balanced equation. Which brings us all the way back to that freezing, miserable, rainy Tuesday afternoon. Back to the high-definition camera monitor mounted on the wall in my quiet, secure hallway. When Chloe stood on my front porch, drenched in the freezing rain, holding that baby and begging for salvation because the man she cheated on was now refusing to financially support her, she honestly thought she could easily manipulate my empathy. She thought the quiet, loving, deeply insecure Julian, the man who used to buy her flowers and beg for her attention, was still buried somewhere inside me, just waiting to save her. She was completely, fundamentally wrong. I didn't feel anger looking at her pathetic, shivering form through that camera lens. Anger implies you still care. Anger implies they still have emotional power over you. I felt absolute, undeniable, cold indifference. She was a stranger to me, a stranger who had made a bad bet at the casino of life and lost everything. I left her out there in the rain. I didn't hesitate. I walked back to my comfortable leather sofa, picked up my tablet, took a sip of my hot, rich coffee, and calmly finished reading my commercial real estate contract. 10 minutes later, I watched on the secondary cameras as my private security guards politely but firmly escorted her off the property line, threatening to call the police if she returned, and put her in a cab that I did not pay for. I never saw her face again, and I never cared to find out where she went. Today, my life is completely, utterly unrecognizable from the terrifying nightmare I lived just 2 years ago. I am not just surviving. I am thriving on a level they could never even comprehend. My company is an international powerhouse in the luxury market. We just opened our massive, multi-level flagship retail store in London, and we are expanding into the Asian markets next quarter. But the money, the bespoke suits, the exotic cars, the massive gated house, those are just the loud, superficial byproducts of my success. The true, profound success is the absolute peace I feel when I wake up in the morning. The quiet in my mind. Last spring, Isabella and I got married. It wasn't a massive, stressful, chaotic event designed to impress people we didn't care about or to secure corporate deals. We flew to a small, breathtakingly private historic villa in the rolling hills of Tuscany, Italy. It was incredibly intimate. It was just us, her loving and supportive parents, my fiercely loyal assistant Noah, and a very small, tightly knit circle of close friends who had stood by me when I was sleeping on a freezing warehouse floor eating ramen noodles. As I stood there under the warm Italian sun, looking at Isabella, a woman of absolute integrity, fierce loyalty, and profound kindness, I had a moment of profound clarity. I realized that the worst, most devastating thing that had ever happened to me was actually the greatest, most necessary gift the universe could have possibly provided. Caleb didn't steal my wife. He took out the trash. He removed a parasite from my life that would have drained me dry. My parents didn't abandon me. They freed me. They freed me from a lifetime of desperately trying to please people who were fundamentally, psychologically incapable of loving me for who I was. They tried to bury me in the dirt, completely unaware that I was a seed. Through this excruciating journey, I learned the hardest truth of all. Family is not defined by blood. Blood is nothing more than a biological accident of geography. True family is defined by mutual respect, by unwavering loyalty, and by the people who stand with you in the trenches when the entire world is actively trying to tear you down. Setting absolute, unyielding boundaries with toxic people is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate, most necessary act of self-preservation. You cannot heal in the exact same toxic environment that broke you, and you absolutely cannot save people who are actively, maliciously trying to drown you just to keep themselves afloat. You have to let them sink. I built a massive, impenetrable fortress, not just of stone, steel, and corporate wealth, but of deeply held personal standards. I no longer tolerate disrespect in any form. I no longer accept the bare minimum from anyone who claims to care about me. I am no longer the backup plan, the afterthought, or the punching bag. I am the sole architect of my own life, and the foundation is finally solid. And if there is anyone out there watching this video right now who is currently sitting in the cold, dark shadow of a golden child, anyone who is being constantly manipulated, belittled, gaslit, or betrayed by the very people who share their last name and their DNA, hear me clearly now. Walk away. You owe them absolutely nothing. You do not owe them your sanity, your finances, or your future. Take your immense pain, channel that absolute, burning rage, and use it as fuel to build something so massive, so undeniably, terrifyingly successful, that it casts a permanent, unavoidable shadow over their entire pathetic existence. The best revenge is not engaging in screaming matches, writing angry letters, or having dramatic confrontations. The absolute best revenge is massive, undeniable success, followed by total, permanent, deafening silence. Let them watch you shine from the absolute bottom of the pit they dug for themselves. Have you ever faced something similar with your own toxic family? Have you ever had to make the agonizing decision to cut ties with the people who were supposed to protect you? You are not alone. Share your story in the comments below. Let's build a community of survivors. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Stay strong, protect your peace, and never let anyone make you a backup plan.